I could tell you a little bit about how I've developed in a way. And I was just thinking, when I went to art school, first of all, I didn't have enough money to survive. And I faced the choice of either living in a caravan or in a tiny little room in this provincial town, Maidstone, where my art college was. And I looked at the caravan and I looked at the room and I thought, I can't do it. And I saved up and bought myself a boat, which was very dilapidated, a very run-down thing, but I crammed myself into this little boat at the expense of getting rid of all my possessions. So I had to go to a boot fair and sell everything I had. So all my childhood toys, you know, my books, my cherished possessions, I kept a few bits and pieces, but I realised that if I was going to be able to fit on this boat, there wouldn't be room for all this junk, and my mum didn't want it in her loft. So I went to a car boot sale, and I sold the lot in about 20 minutes. Hardly got any cash for it, but I was suddenly unburdened of all these possessions, and I thought, this is radical. I'm going to go to art school, I'm going to be a radical person. I had a big head of hair then, and everything was like looking really positive. But I realised that I couldn't survive on this boat in isolation. I had to carry the battery from the boat up the hill into the art school and hide it under the desk and plug it in with a pair of jump leads to connect it and charge it up, so the tutors wouldn't see that I was sponging electricity off the institution. And a whole range of ways I had to adapt. First of all, to offload my possessions and clear the space to live in this quite small environment. And secondly, to reconnect myself in a different way to the systems around me. And so I was living broke. I had debts piling up, but nothing like what you have to deal with today. But I had to work in a bar in the evenings. So I'm doing a whole range of strategies, basically, to get around the problem of how to survive in the world. And it induced in me a kind of mindset of survivalism on the one hand, maybe resourcefulness, mean-spirited, stingy meanness, where I would get rid of everything, basically, and not indulge in a consumer society. I was better than that. I was going to be a proud, upstanding, visionary artist, and I wasn't going to be involved in tawdry things like spending money on possessions. My mum's saying, yeah, but you're going to need a jumper if you're going to live on that boat. You've got no heating on it in the winter. I'm saying, never fear, mother, I shall be fine. So I set out into the world with these higher ideals of being disconnected from the shabby world of consumerism. And I turned round on capitalism with a hatred and a ferocity. Like, what a filthy system it is that pits us all against each other and makes us turn everything into a commodity and to sell our best of our pleasure and pride in being a human being as a commodity in the world. We had to kind of deliver ourselves up for sale. It's an idea I despised and railed against. I started reading Marxist theory, started reading something about feminism and psychoanalysis, and became completely muddled and confused about these competing sets of ideas. But one thing became clear, which was that if you could present yourself to a funding body, you could sell yourself to a funding body during the period that I was setting out in my career as being somebody that would engage publics in debate, that would connect with issues in the world, and would somehow respond to particular situations. There was a way of surviving. You could get commissioned. And I thought, at last, I'm not having to sell out, I can keep my principles, I can live as an artist, and I can not sell my ideas, but sort of do deals with people who've got cash and are willing to pay me and fund me to realise these insane visions. So I was able to do things like working in collaboration with my colleague Matthew Cornford, get a jet aircraft and put it in the sky to draw an anarchy symbol. Insane projects that cost thousands of pounds. And I thought, this is because I'm brilliant. I'm able to convince people to do these amazing things, and it must mean I'm a special person. Years went by, my career developed, I was getting in the newspapers, so I got on the TV, we're on the radio, we had like reviews in Art Monthly, we've got a published book, a monograph, everything was going so well. I'm like, this is amazing. It's incredible what you can do. You don't need to sell out your principles, you can stick to what you believe, and if you can convince people to follow you down this path of thought, they'll fund you. Never sold anything. Nothing went to collectors or critics very much. Debts were always hovering around, but it was, I thought, sustainable. And then the world changed. The financial scandal and the transfer of assets from the public sector to the private sector, the smashing up of the welfare state, the tripling of student fees, the cutting back of budgets in universities, the bureaucratisation, the bailout of the bankers, you know the story. The destruction of the system of systems, if you will, which is what made my way of life possible to sustain, suddenly vanished. We had nothing left. Nothing on the... Matthew and I would get together and go, well, what's the next commission then? Who's the next funding bid? Oh, well, that's closed down, that gallery's just shut, that's folded. And it was a desert out there. And I suddenly realised that the success I'd attributed to myself was actually to do with the interaction between myself and my colleague and the institutions that were supporting us. You don't make it alone as an artist, even though they're always saying develop your own unique vision, communicate your unique personal language to the world. Be unique, basically. Be indivisible, be individual, compete, be a special singularity. And the truth is that that's a deception, because you can't survive on your own. We are part of a society, and our success is rooted in the systems around us. At first sight, those are institutions, the Arts Council, whatever it might be, the Film and Video Umbrella, different funding councils that would put together budgets, property developers that want regeneration glossed over and turned into an image of social cohesion. Whatever it is, these things which I thought were there for the taking, like fruits hanging from the trees, were not. They were conditional offers made if you served the interests of the prevailing system at that time, which has flipped. We're now, as you know, in a completely different world order, and we don't have those kinds of opportunities ahead of us. So one of the things that grew up in me, this awareness whilst living on my boat, that I could survive if I developed strategies for plugging into the power source that was under the desk, if you will. I started looking around at the university I was employed by, the University of the Arts London, as it happens. And the cuts in teaching budgets, the increase in student numbers, the boosting of international students who pay much greater fees than the home and EU students, the home and EU students having to triple their fees, the monetisation of the whole system suddenly made me alive to this. It's like, on the one hand, all those sources of funding which I was able to sustain my practice on have gone, and on the other hand, everybody's really focused on the money now in the institution. And it made me, well, even more resentful and angry than I already was. So I started turning some of the knowledge I'd gained through working with people like the Artists Placement Group, the idea of institutional critique, the idea of collaborating with businesses, which were being given all the time in theory as a kind of recognised part of art history, and then as a kind of business practice. Enterprise and employability, we're all told, is the important thing. We need to get out there and work with companies and offer our creative skills to the creative economy. I thought, what happens if you turn that round and see what makes the University of the Arts run? One thing I came across quite quickly was that the University of the Arts has more than £250 million a year of through flow. It's a lot of money. I don't get anything like that. And it doesn't all go into staff salaries. A fair bit does, but actually there's a whole range of things, the systems that run the money of this university, which are not entirely transparent. I don't really understand the language of finance very well. It's kind of cloudy and opaque and vague. Maybe financiers would find it hard to understand an art theory seminar. But I think there's a division between the world of economics and the world of culture, which is actually not a level division. It's a kind of wall of misunderstanding between the two sides. They could not understand us and we don't understand them. But they've got the money and we haven't. So actually it serves a particular interest that we don't understand finance. And we've been doing some work just recently looking at how the University of the Arts might shape its finances differently, with one particular request in mind. Excuse me. And that is that we at the university, staff and students, should start asking questions about the institution itself, which is shaping us and producing us for the world, with a particular view to divesting from fossil fuel. The world crisis, which is being led by the ecological collapse, which is at the pinnacle, is suffering from climate change, is not an accident and it's not inevitable. It's being driven by fossil fuel companies and by banks who fund the fossil fuel companies. The worst of those banks is the Royal Bank of Scotland, and the University of the Arts London puts its £250 million a year into the Royal Bank of Scotland. So we're all talking about sustainability, but the building here, this piece of real estate, the electricity that flows through it, your fees that run through it, staff salaries, all of those things which we're taught not to particularly look at, put another coat of white paint on it and treat it as neutral, is highly charged, but we could be in greater control of it if we started to ask questions. So the kind of questions we ask about who are we, what's the institution that we're part of, what are the opportunities, what are the systems, what are the values, could turn round on this particular institution and bring about real change. So that's my offer to you in a way, is that just as a thought experiment, we could see what if we started to ask the kind of questions that we normally ask of the world outside, back about the place that we're actually in right now. Thanks very much.